Now to the details. Brace for water lock-offs. That's the warning from Acting President of the National Water Commission, NWC, Garth Jackson, amid island-wide drought conditions brought on by recent rainfall levels that are below the 30-year average.
We are into the dry season. We did not get the rainfall that we usually expect in the May period. And so, the main impoundment levels are below what it was last year. However, we have done some significant improvements to the resilience of our system. And with the early attention to the contingency measures, we expect to be able to mitigate the impact on our customers. But we have to caution them that, yes, there's going to be some restrictions in the next few days, starting in the next few days.
The government is allocating $350 million towards drought mitigation efforts. $250 million will be managed by the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. From that amount, $150 million will be directed towards water trucking operations through members of parliament. Another $50 million will go towards purchasing water storage tanks to support vulnerable communities. And $50 million will be allocated to the NWC for trucking water to support critical infrastructure. Jackson says NWC has already taken mitigation measures to deal with the situation in the corporate area.
Our water level today at Hermitage, it was at 241 million gallons per day, which is about just over 61% of our capacity. Those levels are falling at roughly 1% per day. And so we have to make the transition there. The transition in terms of operating regimes. In terms of Mona, the water level there is about 393 million gallons out of the capacity 800 million gallons. So it's at about 49% of capacity. That also is falling at about 1% per day. And that is what we intend to do by the measures we're putting in place to reduce the rate of fall and therefore to ensure that we can continue supplies through the dry period until the rains come later on in the year.
Garth Jackson, acting president of the NWC, speaking on Nationwide at 5 on Wednesday. Meanwhile, Principal Director of the Met Service, Evan Thompson, says the parish of St. James is now feeling the brunt of drought conditions.
What we're seeing now is probably a little bit worse than we experienced last year. The year before that, probably things were worse. So it's not the worst that we've seen at this time of the year. We have had more intense drought periods. And in fact, the main parish that is experiencing drought right now is St. James, but the eastern half of the island is also seeing some amount of dryness. We're seeing some areas experiencing severe dryness, some abnormal dryness, so it's different levels of dryness, but not exactly experiencing drought conditions at this time. But because we're not expecting a significant improvement in the short term, we just have to be prepared for the worsening of the situation for the next few weeks.
Evan Thompson, Principal Director of the Met Service, speaking on Nationwide at 5 on Wednesday. The Minister with responsibility for climate change, Matthew Samuda, says Jamaica is nearing the completion of a climate adaptation plan aimed at tackling threats brought on by rising global temperatures.
The reality is the changing climate was targeted for expected temperature rise of 1.5 degrees. There are some scientists who say we have already breached that point. So national adaptation plans will have to keep pace with the climatic realities. Jamaica is nearing completion and is doing its final review of its national adaptation plan. Now that contemplates that because of the changing climate and because of the shifting weather patterns, some things have to be done, meaning you have to climate-proof your agriculture. You have to use what we call J-STRAT, which is the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment tool, to evaluate all of your infrastructure. So something like roads have to be moved inland because of saltwater damage to those roads.
Minister Samuda, who's also the Minister in charge of water, made the revelation at Wednesday's post-cabinet media briefing at the office of the Prime Minister. He says the government is undertaking multiple projects to shore up the resilience of the water sector.
In the water sector in particular, you have to out-invest to protect the resources that you have, being very clear that you may have reduced resources at that stage. And one of the major things that we have to do, or certainly two major things that we have to do, is one, stop wasting it by pumping it into the ground with old leaking pipes, which will significantly reduce our demand nationally, even while you expect economic expansion because of the policies of the government. And secondly, you have to significantly increase your storage. It is the government's intention to expand the Hermitage facility. We do intend to build a second dam at the Mona facility. But beyond that, the Prime Minister has already articulated a vision that will see a pumped hydro system, which would see a massive dam being built, likely in Clarendon.
Matthew Samuda, Minister with responsibility for climate change and water. The Westmoreland Police have named a person of interest in the bizarre case concerning the death and mummification of an elderly woman whose remains were discovered in a house in Old Hope, Little London on July 6. The deceased has been identified as Viola Destin, who is believed to have died in December 2023. She was 72. The person of interest is Delroy Jones, a Jamaican pastor reportedly living in Colorado in the United States. Nationwide News previously reported the involvement of a clergyman in the case, and so far 2 women have been charged. 54-year-old Gina Robinson is facing multiple charges, including concealment of a corpse, preventing the lawful burial of a corpse, and perverting the course of justice. 49-year-old Laverne Wedderburn has been charged with conspiracy. A new low. That's how Director of Hear the Children's Cry Nigel Cooper has described the court case involving a father who pleaded guilty to raping and trafficking his underage daughter and stepdaughter over several years. The man, a taxi operator, was sentenced to more than 3 decades in prison when he appeared in the Home Circuit Court on Tuesday. He was also convicted of raping another child, his neighbor, around at the same time. He pleaded guilty on February 14 this year. Cooper says he's shocked.
Total disbelief, total shock. This is a new law. A parent would be involved in such multiple heinous acts against their own child and other children. It's repulsive, and we stand against any such type of behavior in Jamaica. It shows then how, sad to say, how people in society are thinking that they could carry out these acts and think that it is normal, that it's okay. It's unexplainable and unexcusable, and we really are concerned about the children that he impacted. They're probably older now, but they would still be impacted, and we hope that they'll see counseling to help to overcome this traumatic experience that they would have been involved in.
The combined sentences for the crimes against all 3 girls total just over 100 years, but the sentences will run concurrently. This means the taxi driver will serve only the longest single sentence of 33 years and 8 months before becoming eligible for parole. The allegations include claims he transported the girls to a friend who had sex with them while he, the father, watched. In one instance, the complainant said her father and his friend took turns sexually abusing her. Cooper is questioning why no other men have been arrested or charged in connection with the case. He also believes the father's sentence should have been longer.
We are dismayed. We are grateful that the courts have acted, but we would hope that he would get a longer sentence, that it wouldn't be concurrent, that he would never have the possibility of seeing the road again in the rest of his lifetime. But it is what it is. Those other perpetrators who were involved back then, that they be brought to justice, the other persons who did these acts to them.
Nigel Cooper, Director of Hear the Children's Cry. The majority of child trafficking cases in Jamaica indicate that perpetrators are well known to their young victims. That's the word from Director of Children and Family Programs at the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA, Dr. Warren Thompson.
The majority of cases are children who are exploited by people they know, not necessarily by strangers who lure them and catfish them or use other means of recruiting them, but people who are connected to them in some way, a family friend, a family member, someone who their parents work with, whatever the case may be. But sexual grooming, we use it to speak in general to any action that a person may engage in to try to get a child to engage in a sexual relationship with them. And I speak to grooming because I believe the majority of our cases involving children are actually sex trafficking cases.
Dr. Thompson was speaking at a child trafficking forum put on by Seniority Resource Connector on Tuesday. He says many parents involved in child trafficking cases are complicit in the actions of the perpetrators.
our sexual grooming legislation is very, very specific. You have to show that a person would have made an attempt or would have communicated with that child on at least 2 occasions and then made an attempt to travel to meet with that child for the purpose of having sex to prove that sexual grooming occurred. That's in law. But generally speaking, there are people who may give children gifts or give the parents gifts, treat them very nicely. And the aim of doing all of that is so that the child can eventually have a sexual relationship with them. We see that happening from time to time. We have seen cases with parents who have been complicit in their children's exploitation. They benefit, they get gifts, they get grocery, they get food, they get money, and encourage the children to engage in sexual relationships with others.
Dr. Warren Thompson, Director of Children and Family Programs at CPFSA. Jamaica's democracy is stuck in a destructive cycle where citizens reject policies and progress simply because they do not support the party proposing them. That's according to the Prime Minister, Dr. Andrew Holness. He was speaking at the handing over ceremony for 93 buses at the Portmore St. Catherine depot of the Jamaica Urban Transit Company on Wednesday.
The nature of our politics and our democracy is that if you don't support the political party that is doing it, the idea can never make sense. And Jamaica needs to move past this and look at the ideas, look at the implementation, look at the execution, but more importantly, Jamaica needs to become a results-oriented society that rewards the people who produce and deliver the results.
Dr. Holness was referring to the continued opposition by the PNP and some Jamaicans to the rollout of the government's rural school bus program. The PNP have also criticized the government for trying to mask its failures in office through a surge in groundbreaking ceremonies for major projects during this election year. Dr. Holness dismissed the concern about the heightened activities and says, look, it's mere coincidence.
In a democracy, governments must work towards elections. And one would think that if governments do the correct things, make the right decisions, and deliver, then they should be rewarded in elections. I mean, is that the logic? So this notion of because you're doing it for election, you shouldn't be rewarded, don't make sense. You want your governments to perform so that you can judge them on their performance in an election. But the idea is a little bit more refined than that. The idea is, why are you doing it just now? Why you didn't do it before? It is coming to fruition in elections. That's just coincidental. This is your government working day and night for years to put these things in place, and they are just materializing in front of you now.
Dr. Andrew Holness, Prime Minister and JLP leader. An increasing number of Jamaicans rely on remittances to supplement their earnings. That's according to the most recent Jamaica Chamber of Commerce Business and Consumer Confidence Survey for the second quarter of the calendar year. The survey was done by Don Anderson's Market Research Services Limited. Colicia Wright tells us more.
As part of President Donald Trump's self-styled Big Beautiful Bill, a 1% tax on remittances leaving the United States has now been signed into law. Despite being reduced from the initially proposed 5% tax, pundits and economists almost unanimously agree this will hurt people from countries such as Jamaica, which rely heavily on this as a means to pay for day-to-day necessities. According to noted pollster Don Anderson, that's a growing category of people in the country.
The data now confirms that remittances play a significant role in ensuring that people can meet their daily household expenditure. But what we've found is that year to date, after 2 quarters, 31% of the households are now receiving remittances, coming back up to the peak of 36% in 2018. So 31%, and it's a pretty noticeable jump from 28% in 2024. That's the year accumulated to 25 year to date. That's 31%, representing a 3% increase in the number of households that are receiving remittances. Right?
Mr. Anderson also noted that this benefit from remittances is not limited to any particular socio-economic group.
We have established that a wide cross-section of households. It's not just limited to households in the lower socio-economic group, but households in the high and middle and high socio-economic categories. We can see that as against, of course, 41% in the low category and 37% in the middle. And in the high, middle, and high, it's 22%. But it's right across the socioeconomic profile of the country, remittances are being received within households.
The data also revealed that nearly 50% of remittance beneficiaries receive that benefit every 3 months or less.
34% of the households that we interviewed receive remittances once per month. This is up 1% on the first quarter. 7% receive every 2 months. 6% every 3 months. So when you accumulate that, we have just about close to 50% of the households that receive remittances at least once every 3 months. That's a good flow. As we can see, 6% receive funds when they're available from the senders.
Khalesia Wright for Nationwide News.